Welcome back. Today's topic is Tina Brooks's True Blue. This is a recent release in Blue Note's classic vinyl series that came out, I think like mid-November, maybe like right before Thanksgiving. Got my copy in while I was on vacation and was really excited to dive into this thing. So that's what we're going to talk about. It's going to be a little bit unusual, I'd say, for some of my videos because most of the time I have some other version that I'm comparing the release to. Well, guess what? This is the first time I've ever owned a copy of True Blue in any format. So therefore, it's going to be a little bit different, but I'm still going to talk to you about what I think about the album, talk a little bit about the history of this thing as well. So that's what we're going to do. As always, hit like, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and follow me on Instagram at what_can_brown. All right, so here it is, True Blue, and honestly, for the sake of this video, and because I know that there's always reflection and stuff, I'm just going to go ahead and lose the shrink wrap. I don't really care about these type stickers that much anyway, so hopefully this is a little bit better. All right, so where to start with this thing? Maybe the lineup. I don't know. So you've got Tina Brooks, you've got Freddie Hubbard, Duke Jordan, Sam Jones, and Art Taylor on this thing. And as far as the content goes, let's see, there's 6 tracks. Actually, 5 of them are Tina Brooks's original compositions, and just one of them is a standard that was brought to the session. This thing was recorded in June of 1960, and it would be released in December of 1960. This is actually not the first session that Tina Brooks had as a leader for Blue Note, but it is the first session that was actually released. So let's see. I mean, let's talk, I guess, a little bit about Tina Brooks, and maybe before I get any further with this thing, I want to talk about the pronunciation of his name, because by the way, I know I get names wrong all the time, and listen here. Part of the problem is a lot of these folks are not in sort of the public, I don't know, vernacular, right? And so most of the time when you see a musician's name, you're coming up with a pronunciation yourself. Maybe you're reading in a book. You're not hearing other people use these names on a regular basis. And so therefore, with some of these folks, there's a little bit of controversy in terms of how you pronounce their name. So Tina Brooks is not his name by birth. His name was Harold Floyd Brooks. And Wikipedia states, and yes, I am using Wikipedia as a reference in this situation, Wikipedia states that Tina became his nickname as a variation of Teeny, like Teeny. So Tina became his nickname as a variation of Teeny, which is what he was called as a kid. On the other hand, Downbeat, and I've got these Downbeat compilations, right? So Downbeat, on the other hand, in their review of this album from 1961, states that his name is pronounced Tina, as in tiny. So both reference a nickname. They're just confused on which nickname it was. Is it referencing tiny or teeny? The liner notes of this record confuse this even further by stating that Tina is a corruption of Tina Tiny or Tina. So they reference both of them, and reference that it's a nickname from Brooks's youth. So I call him Tina Brooks, and I know that some folks call him Tina Brooks, but I'm going to call him Tina Brooks. And if somebody can produce a video of whomever, right, like another tenor player like Freddie Hubbard or somebody who worked with him, and they reference his name like in a audio interview, that would be great, because who better to know these things than the people who actually knew the guy when he was recording. So that's that. I wanted to get his name out of the way. I am pronouncing it Tina. So one thing I also wanted to say is that this is Tina Brooks's only album as a leader for Blue Note. So what that means, because some of you folks, anybody who's tuning into this probably is also interested in Blue Note's Tone Poet series, right? So each of those other sessions that have been reissued in the Tone Poet series and had previously been released in other formats in Japan and places, those were all originally shelved sessions. So True Blue is the only album that Tina Brooks ever led as a leader, actually for any label, not just Blue Note. And it's a little, I mean, it's very sad actually that this was the case, both because I think he was a phenomenal musician, but also because this album was recorded, like I said, in 1960. And the man lived until 1974. He actually didn't record at all, to my knowledge, after 1961, though. So he recorded this album, months later stopped recording. According to Wikipedia, he struggled with heroin dependency, and he died of liver failure in 1974. All right, so I mentioned that, unlike many of my other videos where I actually have other editions and I'm kind of doing a shootout or a comparison or something, don't have that luxury in this case. And the reason is that this album is quite rare. I would say, this is like, who knows how many, how many copies of any of these records there are and how many they were originally pressed and all that kind of thing. But I would call this the rarest in the 4000 series. For sure. And it could be the most valuable as well. So to the point of rarity, and actually according to an article that was written for Coda, which was a Canadian jazz publication, or maybe is a Canadian jazz publication, I'm not sure if they're still around. True Blue was released around the same time as Freddie Hubbard's Open Sesame. That was Freddie Hubbard's debut as a leader as well. So they were released right around the same time. Actually, Open Sesame is a record that Tina Brooks played on as well. But what it sounds like is that they were released around the same time, and True Blue was just not really promoted. So, it's kind of hard to unpack that. I've read some articles and things of people who have done some research, and what they kind of said is that Tina Brooks didn't really have any fans at the label. So like Alfred Lion, I guess, didn't really, I don't know, I guess just wasn't the biggest fan of Tina Brooks. So he, would kind of record these sessions, but then also not really follow through on actually putting them out. And so the idea that he would, record it and then kind of just back away from it a little bit and not promote it, I don't know. I mean, here's the thing. All we know is these little slivers, these little nuggets of information that we can get from people at the time or from people who have done extensive research and interviews and stuff. But anyway, the speculation is that it simply wasn't promoted. And if you look at maybe one other measure of rarity, and that's Discogs, how many people have an original pressing in their collection? Well, there are 151 people who do. That is quite low. Now, remember, Discogs doesn't have everybody in the entire world, and not everybody has cataloged their collections, but 151 people claiming they have an original pressing of this is low relative to most other Blue Note titles. So, we presumably means that there's not a lot of copies of this thing, and that it is indeed quite rare, and that's evident by the thousands of dollars that it goes for on eBay. All right, so let's see. This thing was originally put out in 1960, as I said, and I want to be clear, it was put out in mono and not stereo. So this did not have a stereo release originally by Blue Note. So from 1960 until 1981, there was no reissues of any kind in any format in any country. In 1981, the Japanese Blue Note label released it, and I want to say that they released it in stereo in 1981. The first reissue in the United States was in 1994, and that was in the Blue Note Connoisseur series, and they chose to put it out in stereo as well. So keep this kind of in perspective. It came out in 1960. There was no, there's no Liberty reissue or United Artists reissue. You're not going to find one of these that's like, in that sort of early 70s time period with the blue label and the black note. Like, there's no ability to get this thing. It was the original pressing and then nothing until it was released in Japan in the 80s and in the US in the 90s. So other than that, there are a couple of other editions that have been put out of this thing. So Classic Records, not Classic Vinyl Series yet, but Classic Records reissued this in mono actually in 2002. And that was the first time that it had been reissued in mono since the original. Then Music Matters put it out in stereo for their double 45 LP reissue in 2008. And then I actually believe Disc Union put it out in their DBLP series in 2013, and that edition was in mono as well. So the last time that this title was put out was in Blue Note's 75th anniversary series, not that long ago. And anyway, here they are reissuing it in in their classic vinyl series, and with the with it being sourced from the original analog tapes, right? Because that's a characteristic that was not the case with the 75th anniversary series. They were using digital. So, all of this to be said, I don't own a copy because the thing is rare, and I'm happy to be able to own this copy because it's inexpensive and it's sourced from the original analog tapes. All right, so if you are not that familiar, I guess, with the classic vinyl series, I mentioned, yes, it is mastered from the original analog tapes. This is a stereo edition. The mastering is done by Kevin Gray at Coherent Audio, and it is on 180-gram vinyl. So a lot of people ask, what's the difference between a classic vinyl series and a tone poet? And there are differences, not just the gatefold jacket. So obviously there is the gatefold jacket with Tone Poet, and with this there isn't. And in fact, it is a pretty cheap cover, but this is what you get when you're not spending the $40+ for a Tone Poet, right? And you're spending money on just a kind of a standard edition. They sacrificed with the cover, but fortunately the music is still quite good. So independent of the cover differences, though, the other fact is that this is pressed at Optimal in Germany, and the Tone Poets are pressed at RTI. And I think anybody who has purchased either the Blue Note 80th anniversary series or the classic vinyl series, and certainly the 75th anniversary series, know that there's been lingering quality issues with Optimal and with whoever else they might have used for the 80th or the 75th anniversary series. I personally haven't really experienced that quality issue at all before. Now, granted, I never bought any of the 75th anniversary series. I do own just a couple of the other classic vinyl series releases. I personally haven't had an issue that I can that I can confidently say is a problem with Optimal. That's what I'll say about that. So. Enough about the history. We've talked about that, the pressing. Let's talk maybe just a little bit about the music, because that's what we're all here for, right? All right, so just to sort of orient you on the stereo presentation of this thing, because I know there's probably a lot of folks who have not heard this in stereo. So first of all, Freddie Hubbard is in the left channel, and he sounds just phenomenal on this record for the most part. Really clean sounding tone. There is like a slight echo, but an intentional one, and I think it adds a little bit of like a majestic quality in some ways to his playing. Duke Jordan, I would say I'm hearing in the left center. I've seen elsewhere somebody describing the stereo soundstage on this thing and saying that Duke is right in the middle. I didn't really hear that. It feels a little bit more left to me, but maybe my hearing is going. Who knows? The bass I hear is in the center as well. Tina Brooks I have in the right channel along with the drums. As far as the players here, it's very clear that the stars of the show are Freddie Hubbard and Tina Brooks. And I certainly don't want to just say Tina simply because he's the leader and because most of these compositions are his. I actually think that Freddie Hubbard outshines Tina Brooks on this record. And I think it's for a couple of reasons. One is that Freddie just sounds really, really inspired. He has lots of solo space. His horn is quite a bit louder than Tina Brooks's, and he just sounds more confident. Tina Brooks, on the other hand, is not nearly as dynamic, and I think that part of it could be the recording, but I think part of it is simply the amount of air that he's putting through his horn. He's just not playing as with the same sort of animation, the same dynamics, the same like energy that Freddie Hubbard is. And who knows why that might be the case? Perhaps because he was nervous, perhaps because it was an off day, or perhaps he played fantastically, and simply he wasn't recorded as well. But I think what is clear is that Freddie Hubbard was recorded much better, sounds much better than Tina Brooks. Now, that being said, Tina still sounds phenomenal here, and he still has amazing solos, and I think these are great examples of his ability to compose. And this music is just, it's classic. It's absolutely classic. And this is the first time I've ever heard this on vinyl, right? I've listened to some digital tracks, but I get a different experience when I'm kind of like, in the record room and I've got the music on, especially for something that's brand new. I'm not sidetracked. I'm not like punching out Instagram posts while I'm listening to something, especially for the first time, maybe the second time. So, I tend to devote a little bit more attention when I want to experience music for the first time. And in any event, these are just kind of some of my observations, I suppose. Now, one of the things that I did want to bring up is that despite the fact that I think that this is classic music, right, and that in that it sounds great, not everybody has thought so historically. So going back to Downbeat, what I did is I looked up the review. I looked up the Downbeat review from actually came out in 1961. So this was it was released in like December of 1960, so they didn't get to review it in Downbeat until 61. So I wanted to read a little bit of that for you. Because they gave it 2.5 stars. And so I wanted to kind of understand that. And so I read and, kind of took note of some of the reviewers' comments in here. So this is what he said. The tenor's, so referring to Tina Brooks, the tenor's principal asset is vigor and forthrightness. A debit, though, is his whining sound, which, after very few hearings, tends to irritate in and of itself. It is insufficient to flaunt the currently fashionable gutsy and hard approach to tonal quality on tenor sax. There must be warmth too. So, and I'll continue in a second. What he's saying is that he finds Tina Brooks's tone irritating, and more than that, he's tying Tina Brooks's sound to the new sound. He's calling it a fashionable, gutsy, and hard approach. He's referring to hard bop and associating Tina Brooks with that and saying that that's not enough. You can't just be that. You also have to have this warmth. And I thought that was interesting. It almost makes you wonder, is the reviewer talking about Tina Brooks or is he really talking about John Coltrane? Almost like punishing Tina Brooks because this guy doesn't like Coltrane. And more on that in a minute, because I know that I just made an unfounded statement, but more on that in a second. And so, a reviewer at this time period who perhaps was a little bit more used to the earlier styles and maybe he was thinking of other tenor players, right? Like, I don't know, like Coleman Hawkins or somebody like that. It feels to me like that Tina Brooks is getting a little bit punished here, but at the same time, I also said in my early comments that I didn't think that Tina sounded as good as he could, and that he sounded a little timid, and that his horn wasn't quite as loud. So there could be a few things mixed in here, and I don't want to necessarily put words in the reviewer's mouth, but that's kind of my summation of those first couple of sentences. So the reviewer then goes track by track and provides a brief statement to sort of almost discredit each of them. So he says regarding the track Good Old Soul, doubtful as to what jazz bag it belongs to. For the track Theme for Doris, the reviewer calls the minor theme, quote, rather pedestrian. The title track, True Blue, he says is derivative of Bobby Timmons's This Here, which is a great track that Timmons wrote, and I think the Messengers recorded. The last track's chorus he calls unpardonably sloppy, and that Hubbard sounds positively uncomfortable and clams in royal style at the beginning. The reviewer concludes saying that there is more promise than fulfillment in this set, so far as the horns go. And I mentioned that this is a horns album. This is Tina and Freddie, and don't get me wrong, there's some other solos, but this is Tina and Freddie's album. It really comes across that way in terms of how the horns are treated in the mix, and just, I don't know, how everything sounds. So you may wonder who was the reviewer. The gentleman's name is John A. Tynan. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. This was Tynan. So Tynan was famously, I'll call it, dismissive of free jazz and how music was evolving. And he had something to say specifically about Coltrane, so this is why I mentioned Coltrane earlier. Something specific to say about Coltrane's playing with Eric Dolphy, and kind of, not believing that was, I think he called it anti-jazz. So, how much credit should we really give Tynan? According to the types of things that he typically reviewed, he leaned a little bit more into West Coast styles. The problem is you can say how much credit should we give him, but here's the thing. If you are a Downbeat reviewer, there's no one else reviewing it in Downbeat. I mean, it's like his review was the one that everybody read. He gave it 2.5 stars, and he had so many poor things to say, or so many bad things to say about Tina Brooks. So, unfortunately, we have sort of a combination of things, right? Blue Note doesn't promote the album supposedly, and then it gets a poor review in Downbeat. And, did it sell? Who knows? Not that many people seem to buy it. There's not that many copies out there. And Tina Brooks didn't record as a leader again. And he basically retired from at least recording the following year, or even months potentially after this review. All right, so kind of set some of those things aside, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what I think. And it's difficult to talk about music, especially when you can't refer it to say, this is what it sounds like compared to something else, right? I don't have another edition, so it's more about just generally what I think. I think it's clear that I really enjoy this album. I think that just the playing, especially by Freddie Hubbard, is really inspired. Tina Brooks does sound really good. I'm making criticisms that I probably shouldn't even do. I'm just thinking about how he sounds relative perhaps to Freddie Hubbard, and think that maybe if he had a little bit more, I don't know, volume even, that maybe, maybe it would just be, it would improve the mix maybe just a little bit more. But what I would say is that Freddie Hubbard's horn sounds excellent at times, but there are a few places where either he or the recording cause like a bit of feedback, or that the notes kind of break in the upper register. And I don't think that it's because he's blowing so hard that he flubs notes, because that happens in situations where he's not playing very loud, and he doesn't seem to be playing with that much intensity. So I think that it may be how it was originally recorded, or it's possible that it could be this particular pressing, but I don't really know. And what am I even seeking anyway? Perfection? There's no album that's going to be completely perfect. I noticed it more than a few times actually, that Hubbard's horn just kind of sounded like the tone was a little meh. Even in areas where he's not playing with intensity. I also thought that the drums could be louder, and specifically that there isn't much sonic detail with the drums. I don't know. I mean, I'm probably just comparing this to a Tone Poet pressing and expecting something that either I shouldn't expect out of classic vinyl, or maybe I'm expecting something that isn't in the master tapes. And then, it's unfair anyway, right? Overall, I think the album sounds really balanced, except for the drums, who I think could be louder. And as I've kind of been almost apologizing for my comments as I make them, these are minor issues. This is a really nice pressing of this record. It isn't Tone Poet, but then it's not in that series, and it's not at that price point either. I think that the classic vinyl series is some of the best music that you can get these days for the price. And I do turn to it for the titles that either I don't have at all, like True Blue, or titles that I don't have in great shape. So Cool Struttin' was a good example of one that I grabbed the 80th anniversary series. And I'm trying to think trying to think what else that I've gotten. I think I have like maybe 2 or 3 others that are in this series. And again, I try not necessarily to pick the classic vinyl series up because I kind of want to be wowed. And for me, like, I get a lot of wow from the original pressing. I get a lot of wow from the Tone Poet series. And, you know, I think in this case, it's like this is an acceptable addition to get, considering what the alternative is, because that Disc Union copy is quite expensive, probably hundreds of dollars. And Music Matters, I haven't looked into how much that one goes for, but happy to have this classic vinyl series. It will get a lot of play, especially because I just feel like I'm so behind, like, given that this is the first copy I've ever owned. So I don't have as many spins in, if you will, obviously. And so I'm going to want to get more and more familiar with this record and just kind of experience it. And so that's what I'm excited to do. All right, so that's it. This is the record. I'll put a link, purchase link in the description in case anybody's interested, but I don't think anybody's going to have a hard time grabbing this. In fact, if anything, Blue Note seems to be discounting a lot of their classic vinyl series releases. Seemingly, all you have to do is wait a couple months, and then they put it on Amazon for a significant discount, or at least a lot of titles have been popping up here and there on Amazon for like 30% off, 40% off. I had to pull the trigger for this thing. I was excited to get it. I've never owned a copy, so I was excited to pick this up as soon as it came out, and I do that from time to time rather than wait. But that's just me. Well, anyway, thank you very much for tuning in, hearing my thoughts about this record, and I will see you next time.